So we currently have in the sky a planetary war between Mercury and Venus, and because Mercury and Venus are moving at pretty much the same speed right now, it's going to go on for a while, and Mercury is going to be at a lower longitude than Venus until November 13th. So right now, actually, this planetary war with started on October 28th when Mercury and Venus were at like 2 degrees of Scorpio, and it continues until November 13th. To see, even right here, this is November 13th, and then the next day you see Venus moves a little bit past, or actually even this is the next day, this is the 15th, so Mercury is now, so Venus is now, it's actually the 14th, November 14th you would say. Oh yeah, I do have the 14th. So here, but even then it's going to be close, because here you see Venus is 2243, Mercury is 2138, so it's more than 1 degree. But from, until the middle of November, we're going to have this planetary war between Mercury and Venus. Now, what's planetary war? It's when the planets are within 1 degree of each other and their energies get mixed. And in this case, we have them in the sign of Scorpio. Now, you have to consider everything that's going on. You also have to consider that Mercury and Venus are friends. They're friendly to each other. Now, the word planetary war doesn't sound very nice, to have a war. What really happens is that one planet sort of transfers its energy to the other, and it doesn't mean it's defeated or negated. Well, the word is defeated, but it's not like its energy goes away. These planetary energies never go away. It's like what happens, let's say, when you defeat a country in a war. The country doesn't go away. It's just you then own its treasury, its treasure. So it's kind of like that. So Venus is getting defeated by Mercury in a planetary war. So the qualities of Venus, which are about diplomacy, kindness, manners, even things like beauty and sensuality and those kinds of things, are being filtered through Mercury, which is more intellectual, more verbal, more critical. Mercury is neutral. It doesn't necessarily want, to fulfill our desires. That could be there. Mercury likes to enjoy things. Mercury has enjoyment. Venus and Mercury share a lot of things, but Mercury is less driven towards making people happy and accommodating them and manners and stuff like that. Mercury is much more neutral and much more intellectual. And so Mercury defeating Venus in the planetary war until November 14th shows that we'll be less inclined to really give in to try to please another person, for instance, if we're not feeling like doing it. Mercury will just be more flexible and create a story about it, like, well, if I don't feel like it, I'm not going to, kind of thing. Now, they're also in Scorpio, which brings about things like, the potential for suspicion and jealousy and exaggerating and our imagined fears. Scorpio is a sign, of those things. It's where we sense that the things we're emotionally attached to can get taken away, and we start to become nervous about it. We become emotionally restless about it. You see, they're also joined Rahu, especially around November 14th and November 15th. It's exact, right on Rahu, which amplifies this imagined fear, this imagined stress. So these things are all happening right now with Mercury and Venus in this planetary war. So you might find that diplomacy and decorum and, sweetness, you might say, these qualities of Venus that maintains our personal relationships and helps us get along, are much harder to come by right now. And they're being filtered through Mercury, which is, it's kind of like, because Mercury doesn't do very well in Scorpio, it's kind of around this kind of intellectual distancing. And because it's Scorpio, there's still a big trigger about, there could be qualities of revenge and suspicion and accusation and aggression. And with Mercury, though, Mercury's nature is to explain things away, like explain it, like, so there can be a lot of potential emotional aggression and verbal aggression and intellectual aggression. But because it's Mercury, we could be saying, well, I'm just like this, and be kind of blasé and casual about it, and be really disconnected from the feeling quality of the other person's, of what's in the other person's heart. And it can be really damaging to our relationships, to our romantic relationships, our romantic connections, because there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of feeling right now, and Mercury filtering the karmas of Venus can bring this kind of aloof kind of explanation that's really driven by maybe even a sense of vengeance and a sense of of retribution and things like that. So it's very tricky. There's also a lot of creativity possible. There's a lot of things that could be happening here because both Venus and Mercury are very creative planets whenever they join, which is a lot. There's a lot of creativity. So especially in Scorpio, which is things like music and writing and any kind of creativity that connects to the heart, those things can also be happening right now. But the planetary war itself has to do with when planets get within 1 degree of each other. And because Mercury and Venus are moving about the same speed right now, because Mercury's moving slower because he's about to turn retrograde. Mercury turns retrograde on November 24th. After this, Venus starts to separate from Mercury. You'll see, like, the next day, Venus is 23:58. Then you see 25:12. Mercury is slowing down. He's starting to station before going retrograde at that point. So keep this in mind. From October 28th was when it started, October 28th until November 14th, this has been the time that Mercury has been defeating Venus in the planetary war. And the other thing that makes it especially interesting is because Mars has just moved into Leo. It's a lot of Mars energy suddenly since around the same time. We can be really acting with a certain amount of, hostility as well, and really being, really sort of cutting people out. Like, okay, I'm cutting you out. Mars is very cutting. And it's like, okay, now I feel strong and courageous, so I'm cutting you out. Because Mars had been debilitated for a couple months, going through Cancer, where we don't feel so strong. Whenever Mars goes into Leo, there's often a really strong and severe backlash and assertion of self-will. And so this is happening as well. So we have this planetary war in Scorpio, which is about emotional battles. And then Mars, the ruler, is in Leo, which is about, like, claiming our independence through actions. And it's like, I'm strong, powerful individual. I don't need you. Anytime Mars is really powerful, Venus stuff is getting a little bit hammered because Venus is where we compromise and try to connect. Mars is where we assert our individuality. So there's a lot of asserting our individuality right now just because Mars is in Leo. But then this Mercury-Venus in the planetary war makes it even more so. So watch your relationships and watch your connections right now for sure, especially until November 14th.